He saw himself as the embodiment of the American dream, a successful business, 3 children, a beautiful wife, and a home where everything seemed perfect, until he read a short message on her phone. In that moment, his world shattered like glass under a stiletto, beyond repair. Behind the mask of a loving family lurked betrayal, manipulation, swapped identities, treachery of his own blood, and a conspiracy that had been unfolding for years, one in which he was merely a pawn in someone else's game. But if anyone thinks he simply vanished to be forgotten, they're wrong. The man they betrayed is gone. From his ruins, something else emerged. Cold, calculating, relentless. Now each of them will pay. Not instantly, not with rage, but methodically, with surgical precision. This isn't revenge. It's the restoration of what was destroyed. And when the day of reckoning comes, they won't immediately realize who orchestrated their downfall, but they will. Too late. Greetings, my dear friend. I am very happy that you are watching my video, and I will be even happier if you subscribe to my channel. This will make me even happier. Let's get started. To Paxton Hart, his life had always felt like the realization of the American dream. Raised amid the sweeping plains of rural Montana in a house that never pretended to be more than it was, he climbed his way to prominence through raw determination and tireless effort. By 38, he had founded Frontier Solutions, a premier cybersecurity firm responsible for safeguarding vital digital infrastructure across the country. His expansive Tudor-style home, nestled in a quiet Denver suburb, served as the backdrop for what he believed to be the perfect family portrait. His wife, Valerie, had stood by his side for 12 years, and together they were raising 3 children: Colin, age 11, Lana, 8, and Nolan, just 5. At the heart of Paxton's values stood his father, Randall Hart, a self-made mogul who built his empire in construction. Earning Randall's approval had always been Paxton's quiet mission. Sundays were reserved for family dinners at Randall's palatial estate, meals that included Paxton's younger brother Dorian, his sister Aria and her husband, and their mother Delilah. Yet those evenings often left Paxton feeling like an outsider. Conversations would falter when he entered the room, laughter bubbling up from jokes he never heard. "Still hustling, huh, Pax?" Dorian would tease with a heavy-handed pat on the back. "You gotta learn to enjoy the ride." He'd then shoot a sly grin at Valerie, who would laugh a little too easily. Paxton brushed these moments aside, throwing himself even harder into the relentless demands of his company. Valerie never objected to the long hours, and he took that as a testament to her loyalty and understanding. But in truth, the distance Paxton thought he was bridging with hard work had quietly become the very space Valerie needed to carve out her own freedom. The image of a flawless, balanced life began to crack just 3 months prior, when Randall was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer. He turned down aggressive treatments, choosing instead to remain at home and spend his remaining days surrounded by family. As his condition worsened, Paxton noticed Valerie making frequent visits to Randall's house, usually under the pretense of helping Delilah. He hadn't thought much of it, until the night he picked up her phone while she slept. "Already missing you. These short visits aren't enough anymore. Are." The message lodged in Paxton's chest like a splinter. He tried to explain it away, tell himself it wasn't what it looked like. The possibility that it was, that something had been going on between Valerie and his father, was too horrifying to accept. At work, Lawrence Patterson, his COO and closest advisor, a former intelligence officer with a radar for emotional shifts, immediately noticed Paxton wasn't himself. During a late-night strategy meeting, Lawrence asked casually, "Everything all right at home?" "Just worried about my dad," Paxton replied, keeping the weight of his discovery locked away. Lawrence didn't push, but his eyes said he knew there was more. "You know I've got your back. Anything, anytime, no questions." As Randall's health declined further, the family rotated through shifts by his side. Paxton began to pick up on strange, troubling details. The way Valerie lingered near Randall when the room was otherwise empty, how she clasped his hand and leaned in close, whispering softly. It wasn't the behavior of a dutiful daughter-in-law. It was something else. Paxton also noticed how Dorian and Arya exchanged quiet looks when Valerie was near. Silent acknowledgments of something unsaid, something Paxton hadn't been told. Then, on the night before Randall's death, Paxton caught Valerie sobbing quietly in the guest bathroom. She hadn't seen him standing in the doorway. "He can't leave me," she murmured, her voice cracking. "He told me we'd have our time." Paxton stepped back, stunned, his pulse pounding in his ears. The reality he thought he knew was shattering. Randall passed the following night. The whole family gathered in the sterile room, bracing for the inevitable. When the hospice nurse quietly announced that Randall had only minutes left, the old man stirred. "I need a moment with Paxton," he rasped, his voice worn to a whisper. Valerie lingered by Randall's side for a beat too long before gently releasing his hand, an act too intimate to be innocent. Delilah touched Paxton's shoulder in passing, but didn't look him in the eye. Paxton sat at his father's side. "I'm here." Randall opened his eyes, sharper than Paxton expected. "I was never proud of you," he said, his voice flat, "but I always envied you." The words landed like a blow. "Envious? Of what?" Paxton asked, shaken. "Because she picked you," Randall said, gripping Paxton's wrist with a frail but fierce hold. "Even though she never truly loved you." Everything stopped. Randall revealed that his affair with Valerie had started before Paxton had ever introduced her to the family, back when she was working as Randall's assistant 15 years ago. "She only married you so she could stay close to me," he admitted, his voice brittle with age. "When you brought her home, it felt like fate. She could be in my life without raising suspicion." Paxton couldn't move. "You're telling me you've been involved with Valerie since before we got married?" "I wanted to leave with her," Randall said, voice fading, "but after Delilah's stroke, I couldn't do that to her. So we kept it quiet. I'm sorry. We all are." "Who knew?" Paxton asked, his voice low, trembling. Randall exhaled heavily. "Everyone. Dorian, Arya, even your mother." "My kids?" Paxton choked out, already knowing the answer in his gut. But Randall said nothing more, his breath stilled. A slight, eerie smile lingered on his lips. Paxton stood there, frozen. No tears, no words. He turned away without acknowledging the others, walking past their worried faces without meeting a single eye. He found himself in Randall's private study, the room where empires were planned and secrets were kept. There, resting innocently on the desk, was Randall's phone, still unlocked. Paxton's father had always been a stranger to the digital world. His gadgets were perpetually unsecured, left open like windows in a storm. With trembling fingers, Paxton accessed the messaging app on the old man's phone. At the top of the screen, a chat titled Family Matters stared back at him. The members, Randall, Valerie, Delilah, Dorian, and Arya. He began scrolling. What he found buried in those messages unraveled him piece by piece. The texts revealed a web of deception, discussions about keeping Paxton ignorant, maintaining the illusion, never letting him discover what lay beneath the surface. A message from Valerie dated 3 years prior. "He's stuck at the office again." "Yours or mine," Randall replied. Delilah added, "Go to the lake house. He never steps foot there anymore." 3 years ago, yet it struck like yesterday. 2 years ago, Dorian had sent a message that read, "Congrats, sis. Looks like I'm going to be a father again. Paxton's over the moon about it." Paxton, unaware of the truth, had already painted the nursery walls. Then came a message from Arya, matter of fact and chilling. Rule number 1, Paxton stays in the dark. He's the asset. As long as the money flows, we all win. And with that, the betrayal clicked into place like the final piece of a cursed puzzle. He learned his father had siphoned off his earnings to fund Dorian and Arya's string of failed projects. That Valerie's marriage to him had been a tactical move, all while she kept her affair with Randall alive. That his own mother had manipulated it all to maintain financial access after Randall's investments went south. But the most devastating blow wasn't about money or manipulation. It was about the children. Colin, fathered by Dorian; Lana, Randall's daughter; Nolan, conceived with Bryce, Arya's husband. The betrayal wasn't only emotional or financial. They'd robbed him of his role as a father, his very identity. Silently, Paxton pocketed the phone and rejoined the mourners. His expression mirrored the solemnity of the occasion, but something ancient stirred within him, something immovable, no longer pain, not just rage. It was resolve. In the days following Randall's funeral, Paxton perfected his performance. He wore the mask of the grieving son, the loving husband, the attentive father. Beneath the facade, he was methodically collecting evidence, laying the groundwork, planning his counterstrike. Late one night, alone in his study, Paxton retrieved strands of hair from each child's brush and sealed them in envelopes. A confidential lab, recommended by his confidant Lawrence, received the samples the next morning. He paid a premium for expedited results. At the same time, he installed covert, motion-sensitive cameras throughout the house. The footage confirmed what he suspected. Valerie's affair hadn't ended. Only now, Dorian had taken Randall's place. Paxton began shifting assets, dismantling his empire piece by piece. Liquidations, offshore transfers, hidden accounts. Shell corporations disguised every move. Years of expertise in cybersecurity ensured he left no digital trace. With Lawrence's help, every angle was covered. Over lunch, in a secluded corner of a quiet cafe, Lawrence finally asked what had been simmering for weeks. "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" Paxton met his gaze, steady and cold. "My life has been a beautifully crafted lie. The marriage, the family, the children, it was all scripted. I was just playing a part." He laid it all bare. Lawrence listened in silence, his face shifting from disbelief to disgust, then finally hardening with steely determination. "What do you need from me?" he asked in a low voice. "I need to disappear, and when the time comes, I'll need help burning it all down." Lawrence didn't hesitate. "Consider it done." 3 days later, the test results arrived. As Paxton had feared and expected, none of the children were biologically his. The truth was now indisputable. That night, he sat waiting in the dim glow of the living room. Randall's phone, now his instrument of reckoning, lay on the table. Valerie entered, fresh from what she had claimed was a grief counseling session. But Paxton knew better. It was a tryst with Dorian. "We need to talk," he said calmly. "About the arrangement." Her expression faltered. "What arrangement?" He pressed play on the camera footage. The screen filled with damning images. Valerie and Dorian, entwined in the bedroom just days after the funeral. A silence followed. Long, brittle, absolute. Then Valerie spoke, her tone sharp and unrepentant. "We all shared in it, Paxton. Everyone did. You were the only one left out. Randall built the system. He needed control of everything. The money, the relationships, us." She looked at him without remorse. "Your mother backed it because she didn't want to lose her status. Dorian and Arya needed the funding. As for me, I married you because Randall asked me to. He was the one I truly loved." "And the children?" Paxton's voice was like ice cracking beneath the weight of his fury. "They were all part of the structure," she said, voice devoid of warmth. "Randall wanted heirs without the hassle. Dorian wanted to wound you. Bryce did it to keep Arya satisfied." She let out a bitter laugh. "You were so focused on building your empire, you never noticed your home was rotting from the inside. We had everything, except your attention." I had the lab confirm it, Paxton said quietly. Not one of them is mine. For the first time, Valerie wavered. They love you. Regardless of what's happened, they see you as their father. Would you have ever told me? He asked. She didn't flinch. No. The plan was for you to stay blind. Randall set the rules. We followed them. Paxton rose from his seat, no longer the man who had once tried to love them. What remained was a figure shaped by betrayal, calm, silent, and unstoppable. I see, Valerie murmured, her tone clipped and controlled. Well, at least you're finally being truthful. So what now? Nothing changes, Paxton replied, his voice flat, his expression unreadable. Valerie mistook his detachment for acceptance and let out a quiet sigh. Maybe that's for the best, for the kid's sake. Later that night, after Valerie had fallen asleep beside him, Paxton slipped out of bed without a sound. He moved through the house like a shadow, pausing silently outside each child's bedroom. In the dim light, he watched their sleeping forms, memorizing every detail. Despite everything, a part of him still loved them. They weren't to blame for the lies, but staying would destroy him. Each look, each word would rip the wound open again. In his study, he left behind a single sentence on a sheet of paper. I know the truth. Farewell. By the next morning, Paxton Hart had disappeared. No emails, no banking activity, no traceable signals. He was gone without a footprint. Only Lawrence knew the full story. When investigators pressed him, he offered just one chilling remark. He finally saw his family for what they really were. He's not coming back. But the truth was far stranger than anyone could imagine. Paxton hadn't merely run, he had been wiped away. And in his absence, something new was taking shape, not a man driven by grief, something colder, focused, unrelenting, not justice, something more ruthless, retribution. The man who had once been Paxton retreated into solitude, vanishing into the frozen heart of Alaska. There, in a remote cabin owned by a shell corporation Lawrence had prepared years before, he began his transformation. Isolated and unreachable, accessible only by seaplane, the cabin became his sanctuary, his crucible. It was there he shed his past. He emerged under a new name, Gavin Reed. Lawrence had designed the identity with surgical precision, a fully documented history, complete with fabricated records, transactions, and a backstory that placed Gavin as a retired defense contractor who had amassed a fortune before shifting to global asset management. Through the long, brutal winters, with only the wind and Lawrence's rare visits to break the silence, Gavin reinvented himself. The polished strategist faded, replaced by someone leaner, harder. Every day he trained, disciplining his body, honing his mind, forging a new resilience from the ashes of his former life. He let his beard grow, darkened his hair, changed the way he carried himself. Even his voice had shifted, deeper, deliberate, unfamiliar. They wouldn't know you now, Lawrence observed during a visit, watching Gavin split logs with swift, precise movements. That's the idea, Gavin said, his tone colder, each syllable measured. Paxton Hart was naive. He's dead. Lawrence hesitated. And the children? Colin's been acting out. Keeps looking for you online. A flicker of pain crossed Gavin's eyes, brief, nearly invisible. Then it vanished. They were part of the illusion, just like everything else. At night, Gavin devoured the intelligence Lawrence brought. Banking records, surveillance images, conversation transcripts. Piece by piece, he built the full picture. 6 months after he vanished, Valerie moved in with Dorian. Delilah suffered another stroke. This one, devastating. She now required constant care. Aria and Bryce's marriage collapsed. She won custody of their children, and Nolan, whom Bryce had once claimed as his own. But the most revealing detail was the collapse of the Hart Empire. Without Paxton, Frontier Solutions unraveled. The company sold for next to nothing. Randall's estate, passed largely to Valerie, was draining fast, bled dry by reckless investments and Dorian's mounting gambling debts. 18 months after disappearing, Gavin was ready to act. He flew to Brazil and submerged himself in the underbelly of São Paulo, where he trained for 6 grueling months under Mira Voss, a former Mossad agent. She taught him to vanish in plain sight, how to deceive, manipulate, infiltrate. During their final lesson, Mira turned to him and asked, "Why go to such lengths? Revenge rarely fills the void." Gavin met her gaze, unflinching. "I'm not doing this to feel better. This is about equilibrium. Some scores are settled in blood." Over the next 3 years, Gavin built a new empire, not in tech or cybersecurity, but in secrets. His firm, Parallax Intelligence, offered covert intelligence and counter-espionage services to elite corporations and clandestine government operations. With Mira's teachings and Lawrence at his side, now fully removed from Frontier, Gavin operated from the shadows, under layers of aliases and misdirection. No one outside their inner circle knew who commanded Parallax. By year 5, his power surpassed anything Paxton had achieved. Wealth, influence, a network that spanned the globe, judges, mercenaries, hackers, former intelligence officers, all carefully recruited. All part of the machine Gavin would use for what he now called the Reckoning. In the 7th year, Dorian died, an apparent drunk driving incident. For a moment, Gavin paused. One of them had fallen. Then he saw the funeral announcement. Valerie stood graveside, holding Colin close. Colin, now 18. Behind them, Delilah in her wheelchair. Arya and Bryce, seemingly reconciled. A perfect portrait of a family, whole, intact, as if Paxton Hart had never existed, as if Dorian had simply taken his place. Gavin turned to Lawrence, face unreadable. "We proceed. Dorian's death doesn't clear the debt. They all still owe." Over the next 3 years, Gavin advanced his plan with meticulous care and unshakable resolve. While Parallax Intelligence opened a new satellite office in Denver, Gavin kept himself hidden in the shadows, working solely through proxies, his presence never confirmed. Through a front company, he quietly purchased the property housing Valerie's interior design studio. He made generous contributions to the prestigious academy where Lana was enrolled. Without drawing attention, he inserted an undercover operative into Nolan's orbit, posing as a concerned and loyal friend to the emotionally fragile teenager. But the most calculated maneuver was his slow, deliberate connection with Colin. Having chosen to follow in Paxton's footsteps, Colin pursued a degree in computer science. Under a false identity online, Gavin entered his world, posing as a mentor and intellectual confidant. Gradually, he steered Colin toward an internship at a tech firm fully controlled by Gavin under a different name. A decade after Paxton Hart had seemingly vanished without a trace, Gavin Rourke returned to Denver, so physically altered, no one could possibly recognize who he truly was. He purchased a luxurious penthouse overlooking the city skyline, outfitted it with state-of-the-art surveillance systems, and prepared to enact the final act of the plan that had consumed him for 10 relentless years. "Are you really ready for this?" Lawrence's voice broke the stillness as they stood before a wall of glass, the glittering city stretching out beneath them. "Once we make our move, there's no undoing it." Gavin studied his reflection in the glass, impassive, unreadable. "I've been gone 10 years, he replied, "and every single day has led me to this. Paxton Hart had been obliterated piece by piece. Now Gavin Rourke was ready to return the favor." While Gavin rebuilt himself and prepared to strike, those who had betrayed Paxton were already falling apart in slow, agonizing decline. Valerie had played the part of the grief-stricken wife with flawless conviction, tear-streaked TV appearances, heartfelt appeals on social media begging for help locating her missing husband. But privately, she moved in with Dorian almost immediately, switching her affections from father to son without missing a beat, a grotesque twist in their already fractured family. Without Paxton's vision at the helm, Frontier Solutions began to crumble. Clients lost faith in the abrupt leadership change and pulled their contracts. The company's worth nosedived, forcing Valerie and Dorian to sell it at a humiliating loss. The money from the sale, combined with whatever remained in Paxton's accounts, briefly financed a period of excess. But Dorian's plunge into substance abuse and impulsive investments quickly bled their resources dry. 5 years after Paxton's disappearance, the Grand Tudor estate was sold off, replaced by a modest house on the outskirts of town. 2 years after that, Dorian died in a drunk driving crash, returning from a high-stakes poker game he couldn't afford to lose. His death hastened their collapse. Without his meager earnings and hounded by creditors over gambling debts, Valerie finally faced genuine adversity for the first time in her adult life. Delilah, now confined to a wheelchair after a second debilitating stroke, moved in with her. The cost of around-the-clock care was rapidly draining what little was left of Randall's estate. Once a ruthless tactician who engineered her own son's downfall, Delilah now depended on others to survive. Her mind, once razor-sharp, was dulled by medication and the damage of 2 strokes. Aria and Bryce's marriage disintegrated not long after Paxton vanished, strained beyond repair by emotional and financial pressures. But after Dorian's death, they rekindled their partnership, driven by necessity and a shared need to weather the chaos together. Yet it was the children who bore the heaviest burden of Paxton's absence. Colin had been 11 when his father disappeared. He spent years mired in confusion and rage, acting out at school, later becoming obsessed with discovering the truth. He never knew that Paxton wasn't his biological father, only that something never quite made sense. Gifted with technology but emotionally volatile, his teenage years were a turbulent mix of brilliance and pain. Lana, only 8 at the time, turned inward. Her natural quietness hardened into profound social withdrawal. She found escape in her art, but her work, dark, brooding, and full of unease, alarmed her teachers more and more as time passed. Nolan, just 5 when Paxton vanished, retained only faint, fragmented memories. Growing up amid instability and a carousel of untrustworthy male figures, he developed serious behavioral issues, fighting at school, experimenting with drugs and alcohol by the age of 15. Gavin tracked it all from the vast web of surveillance he had built, detached, methodical. He cataloged their weaknesses, noted their vulnerabilities, and identified every leverage point. The children, he realized, were both his greatest emotional risk and his most powerful assets. They weren't his by blood, but they were part of him, and they could become the instruments of his vengeance. As the time to strike drew closer, Gavin gathered critical intelligence. Valerie's design business was nearing collapse. Aria was scraping by as a school administrator where Colin had once been a student. Bryce was stuck in middle management at a car dealership run by someone indebted to Gavin. Delilah's care costs were so high that the family had begun looking into subpar nursing homes they could barely afford. The most significant find came through Colin. Under Gavin's careful tutelage, still unaware of his mentor's true identity, Colin had devoted years to tracing Paxton's past. He built an extensive, obsessively maintained digital archive of Paxton's professional history, personal relationships, and the mystery of his disappearance. He was beginning to get dangerously close to secrets Gavin had buried with great care. "He's sharp," Gavin commented to Lawrence one night, reviewing Colin's latest digital forensics. "He's using advanced data mining techniques. I didn't think he'd get this far." "Is that respect I'm hearing?" Lawrence asked, tilting his head. "It's a fact," Gavin replied coolly. "He's gifted, and clearly doesn't believe the lies his family told him about who I was. That made him indispensable." As the 10th anniversary of Paxton Hart's mysterious disappearance approached, Gavin Rourke had meticulously set every piece in motion. Months of covert intelligence work had revealed Valerie's intent to host a commemorative ceremony, a public signal that she was finally ready to acknowledge Paxton's death. That act would trigger the release of long-frozen estate assets held in trust. The timing couldn't have been more precise. As the world prepared to mourn the memory of Paxton Hart, Gavin would quietly reappear, not in name, but in influence, ready to dismantle what remained of their world with surgical precision, one blow at a time. It was a damp Tuesday evening, precisely 10 years and 1 day since Paxton had vanished without explanation, when Lawrence Patterson sat across from Gavin Rourke inside the fortified meeting room of Parallax Intelligence's Denver branch. Spread out before them were stacks of files, photographs from surveillance teams, and several tablets flashing with real-time feeds. "The service is scheduled for Saturday," Lawrence said, sliding a polished invitation across the table. "Valerie's calling it a celebration of life and closure. She's invited Paxton's former clients, ex-employees, anyone with deep enough pockets to contribute to a scholarship fund she's setting up for the kids." Gavin's mouth twisted into a bitter grin. "Only she could monetize my death." Lawrence remained stone-faced, unshaken. "She also submitted the final paperwork to declare Paxton legally deceased. Once that's finalized, the life insurance and all the previously inaccessible funds will be released to her." "Couldn't be more convenient," Gavin said quietly, tapping a sealed dossier beside him. "We've completed the restructuring on our end. The shell corporations now control majority stakes in every venture they still rely on. Their communications were tapped, their residences wired, every digital trail monitored. Financial tripwires had been carefully embedded." Gavin opened the folder, revealing a detailed diagram mapping the interconnections between false business fronts and every remaining Hart family member. "We initiate Phase 1 tomorrow. Delilah comes first," Lawrence confirmed. "The facilitator," Gavin said evenly. "Her medical expenses are bleeding them dry. Starting tomorrow, her physician, now working under our directive, will recommend an exclusive treatment protocol only available at Aspen Grove Care Center. The same facility we quietly acquired last year," Lawrence added without missing a beat. "They'll think it's a miracle the center's willing to take her, given their budget issues. What they won't suspect is we'll be extracting internal documentation and compiling first-hand accounts, all while managing her care down to the smallest detail." Gavin turned another page. "Bryce is next. By morning, the state's regulatory board will begin a formal investigation into irregularities at his dealership thanks to an anonymous tip. His regional manager, still grateful for a favor you cashed in years ago, will give him 2 options," Lawrence said. "Resign without a reference, or face potential fraud charges. He'll be out of work just as the family needs his income most," Gavin said coolly. "At the same time, Aria will get word that her teaching position is being cut. Budget reductions, which follow a generous endowment to the district's athletic program, courtesy of an unnamed benefactor with one key stipulation," Lawrence continued. "And Valerie's business?" Gavin asked, eyes still scanning the page. "The building has been sold. The new landlord, another shell company, has tripled the rent. She'll have 30 days to pay or vacate. She won't manage either." Lawrence watched Gavin intently, looking for any sign of hesitation. He found none. "And the kids?" he asked, voice softer now. Something flickered in Gavin's expression. Distant, maybe remorse. "Colin's different. He's been looking for answers. For me. He's earned a chance." "And the others?" Lawrence pressed. "Nolan will be approached by one of our agents, posing as a peer. He'll offer him a way to make easy money, harmless courier jobs. Nothing criminal yet. Just testing his limits." "And Lana?" "Her acceptance letter to the summer arts program will vanish. A clerical mishap, a misfiled form, subtle, invisible. She'll never know what happened. And just like that, Her one escape closes. "This is just the beginning," Lawrence said. "Exactly," Gavin replied. "A steady build-up, enough stress to erode their unity, enough doubt to turn them against one another. By the time the memorial arrives, the fractures will already be showing." Gavin leaned back, gaze distant, fixed on some unseen horizon. "That's when I step in, as Gavin Rourke, the elusive investor. I'll offer Valerie a financial lifeline, just as everything around her crumbles." "A savior figure," Lawrence nodded. "And after that, once you're inside, fully embedded in their lives, what's the final move?" Gavin stood, walking to the massive glass window that overlooked the lights of Denver, once the skyline of his old life. "This plan has taken 10 years to construct, Lawrence." "Revenge," he said, "isn't a single act. It's a system. First, I take away their sense of security, then their pride. I'll dismantle the trust that binds them." "And then?" Lawrence asked, voice low. "Then I let them decide." "What kind of decision?" Gavin turned slowly, his tone sharp as steel. "The same decision they gave me. Accept the collapse their betrayal caused, or lose everything trying to outrun it." Lawrence had known him through both incarnations, Paxton and now Gavin. He recognized the quiet certainty in the man's eyes. "And if they figure out who you really are?" A slow, deliberate smile curled across Gavin's face. "That's the entire design, my friend. The danger was never the weapon." He leaned in. "It's knowing who's wielding it. There's a particular sting in knowing ruin is on its way, and being powerless to stop it. That slow, creeping inevitability is where the true edge lies. What I want is for them to sit wrapped in the illusion of safety, only to realize, in their final moment of calm, exactly who is behind the unraveling, and why." Gavin returned to the table, neatly arranging the documents into precise, categorized piles. "It starts tomorrow," he said, his voice steady, unwavering. "By the time they're gathered for Saturday's memorial, the cracks beneath their feet will already be widening. In a matter of weeks, the world they know will turn unfamiliar. And before the year ends, they'll finally understand what it feels like when every pillar of certainty is pulled out from under them." Side by side, the two men reviewed the plan once more, scrutinizing every detail, every possible obstacle, every layer of protection. As the clock inched toward midnight, Gavin secured the files inside a reinforced case. "A decade ago, they destroyed someone who once believed in them," he said, voice low and tight. "They didn't just steal his home, his marriage, his dignity. They took his capacity to forgive. That's what they'll never atone for." Lawrence nodded slowly. "Then tomorrow, we begin." Gavin didn't flinch. "Yes, tomorrow, the ghost they mean to mourn will return to haunt them." The day of Delilah Hart's medical appointment dawned crisp and bright. Gavin observed from a secure feed as Valerie helped the ailing woman into a modest vehicle. Both women moved with the fatigue of long-term strain, worn down by years of quiet decline. Time had eroded Valerie's elegance. Her once confident presence now dulled by ambition unmet and finances stretched past their limits. Inside the clinic, Dr. Elise Weber, carefully selected and generously compensated by Gavin, delivered the diagnosis with a convincing balance of warmth and gravity. Delilah would need long-term care, the kind provided only at Aspen Grove Care Center, an elite facility with an infamously long waiting list. Fortunately, Dr. Weber told them, a rare vacancy had just become available. "And the price?" Valerie asked, anxiety creeping into her tone. "There's no way our insurance can cover somewhere like Aspen Grove." Dr. Weber checked her screen. "Actually, I've already spoken with their administration. Because of your mother's unique case, they're offering a significant discount. They have a sponsorship program made for situations like this." Valerie visibly relaxed, grateful and unaware. She had no idea the program existed only for this purpose, funded in full by the very man whose life she helped ruin. Elsewhere in the city, Bryce Whitman was abruptly called into his supervisor's office. 60 minutes later, he walked out stunned, dismissed under accusations of financial misconduct he didn't commit. His auto sales career, gone. By midday, Aria was pulled into a sudden emergency meeting at the charter school where she taught. She left with 2 weeks' notice and a severance that wouldn't even cover her next rent. Valerie, arriving home from Delilah's appointment, found a series of missed calls on her phone. The new owners of her studio's building weren't renewing her lease. No explanation, no negotiation. The same family who had once orchestrated Paxton Hart's downfall was now watching their own lives collapse, slowly, precisely, by the hands of a man they thought was long dead. 3 days before the memorial, as the family scrambled to regain footing, Gavin Rourke entered their lives in the flesh. Valerie, now scrambling to keep her design business afloat, was reviewing potential new rental spaces, each more expensive than she could afford, when her phone rang. A real estate agent introduced herself, representing a wealthy newcomer. "Mr. Rourke just moved to Denver," she said. "He's in need of an interior designer for his penthouse. He found your portfolio online and was very impressed. He's willing to pay a premium for the right fit." It was the opportunity Valerie had been hoping for. She agreed to the meeting instantly. They scheduled it for the following afternoon. Valerie arrived early, dressed in her most polished professional outfit, clearly worn but carefully selected to convey both style and competence. Gavin watched her from the surveillance feed as she stood in the elevator, rehearsing a practiced, polite smile. When she stepped into the sleek entryway of the penthouse, he let her wait. Exactly 7 minutes. The same number of minutes she had once made Paxton wait before their first date, something he had never forgotten. Eventually, he stepped out, every detail of his appearance deliberate. A figure of understated wealth. Tailored clothing, subtly dyed hair, trimmed beard, and just enough cosmetic refinement to obscure any trace of who he used to be. The man once known as Paxton Hart extended his hand toward the woman who betrayed him and offered a smile. "Mrs. Hart, a pleasure. I'm Gavin Rourke." Valerie blinked. No clear recognition, just a brief flicker of familiarity, quickly dismissed. "The pleasure's mine, Mr. Rourke, and please, call me Valerie." "Valerie it is," Gavin replied. "Come in. I've pulled together a few concepts I'd love your thoughts on." For the next hour, Gavin walked her through the space, describing preferences and inspirations that closely mirrored Paxton's own, choices only someone who knew him deeply would recognize. He referenced a rare Danish furniture line Paxton had adored, watching as Valerie furrowed her brow in quiet confusion. "Is something wrong?" he asked gently. "No. I'm sorry," she said softly. "You just remind me of someone. Your style. It's a lot like my late husband's." Gavin kept his expression neutral. "I wasn't aware you were a widow." The stories tangled. He disappeared 10 years ago without a trace. Now this weekend we're holding a memorial. After all these years, it finally feels like the right time to let him go. "That's devastating," Gavin murmured, his gaze fixed on her face, searching for the subtle truths her expressions might betray. "You must have loved him very much." A flicker of emotion, something like guilt, crossed her features. It was fleeting but telling. "I did. It's been difficult." By the time their conversation ended, Gavin had offered her the design commission, double her usual fee, with a generous advance that would ease her current financial burdens. She left lighter, already calculating how far the money would go. Just before she reached the door, Gavin dangled one more hook. "You have kids, don't you?" he asked casually. "Your oldest, he's in college, right?" "Colin," she nodded. "He's studying computer science, Colorado State." "He must be good with computers." Gavin's tone remained light. My company's always scouting sharp interns. Maybe he'd consider applying. It's a competitive program, and it pays well." Valerie's face lit up, her hunger for opportunity instantly betraying her. Gavin saw everything he needed in that flash. The same opportunism, the same readiness to leverage anyone, even her own son, for personal gain. When she was gone, Lawrence stepped out from the adjacent room where he'd been watching the interaction on screen. "She didn't recognize you," he said. "She saw what she wanted to see," Gavin replied, tugging at his collar. "A rich man with a solution to her problems." She never really saw Paxton either, just a future provider. "The memorial's on Saturday. You going?" Gavin's lips curled into a cold, deliberate smile. "Wouldn't miss it. After all, who skips their own funeral?" The next 48 hours were a dance of careful moves. Gavin advanced the next phase of his plan. Colin received an anonymous invitation to interview for a prestigious internship, technically a separate company, but one owned entirely by Gavin's firm, Parallax. Meanwhile, with the family's finances in rapid decline, Nolan accepted work from one of Gavin's operatives, easy money for questionable deliveries that were growing riskier by the week. Only Lana had been left untouched. Her quiet sorrow hadn't gone unnoticed, but Gavin had deliberately chosen not to involve her, at least not yet. By Saturday morning, the day of Paxton Hart's memorial, Gavin stood in his penthouse closet examining his reflection. Today would bring him a step closer to being seen for who he truly was, just enough to stir suspicion, not enough to reveal the truth. "You sure you're ready?" Lawrence asked, adjusting his tie beside him. Gavin fastened a particular watch onto his wrist, identical to one Paxton used to wear, though this wasn't the original. "I've been ready for a decade," he said. The service was held in what used to be a posh venue, now faded and tired, just like the family hosting it. Gavin and Lawrence arrived fashionably late, slipping in as an old friend of Paxton's gave a tearful eulogy for the man presumed long dead. Valerie noticed them almost immediately. Her eyes lit up when she recognized the wealthy client she'd recently landed. After the ceremony, she wove through the dwindling crowd to greet them. "Mr. Rourke, what a surprise! How did you hear about the service?" "Denver's a small world," Gavin replied with an easy smile. "When I heard the news, I felt it only right to offer my condolences." "This day's been tough," she said, voice tinged with just enough emotion to seem authentic. "But oddly, there's a sense of closure. Please, I'd love to introduce you to everyone." She led him through the crowd, making the rounds. Gavin observed them with calculated interest. Aria looked distracted, probably stressed about her shaky employment. Bryce stank of booze before noon, masking his anxiety behind a tight, artificial grin. Delilah, dulled by medication, sat quietly in her wheelchair, but every so often Gavin caught a flicker of the cunning mind that had once helped orchestrate his downfall. Then came the younger generation, grown now, but shaped by lies. Nolan was aloof, detached, barely offering Gavin a glance. Lana, sharp-eyed and quiet, was the opposite. She took in everything, including the way Gavin paused a little too long in front of Paxton's old photographs. Then came Colin, 21 now. He had Paxton's build, but Dorian's features, a living reminder of betrayal. Unlike the others, Colin didn't dismiss Gavin. "You look familiar," he said, gripping his hand in greeting. "I don't believe we've met," Gavin replied smoothly. "But your mom told me you're into computer science. I mentioned I might have an internship." Colin's brow furrowed. "What company?" "Parallax Intelligence. We specialize in cybersecurity, not unlike what your dad used to do." It was a deliberate prod, and Gavin studied Colin's reaction carefully. Behind the polite expression, gears were turning. The boy was starting to question what others had never dared to. As the crowd thinned, Gavin approached Valerie one final time with a carefully crafted gesture. "I saw the donation appeal for your kids' education," he said with offhand warmth. "I'd like to contribute." He handed her a check, enough to make her gasp. "Think of it as an advance, a goodwill gesture for the work we'll be doing together." "That's extraordinarily generous," she said, her voice trembling slightly as she studied the man standing before her. "I stand with families, especially those caught off guard by heartbreak," Gavin answered, his speech subtly echoing the familiar rhythm of Paxton's voice. As he turned to leave, his eyes locked briefly with Collins. Sharp, searching, the only one in the room who seemed to feel something was off about Gavin Reed. That flicker of suspicion wasn't random. It was deliberate. Gavin had planted it. Inside the sleek car departing from the service, Lawrence stole a glance at his companion. The boys beginning to doubt. "Excellent," Gavin murmured, eyes on the retreating figures through tinted glass. "Let them question everything. Let them dig. Truth is like a blade. It can liberate, but it always wounds first. That blade would shred the falsehoods they'd built their lives upon, even as it dismantled the fragile illusion that kept them going." Gavin's first move had landed. He'd inserted himself into their orbit, left an impression, and embedded both hope and unease deep inside their home. Now, the real work of unraveling could begin. In the weeks that followed Paxton Hart's memorial, fractures in the family widened into gaping voids. Each misstep seemed like chance, but none were accidents. They were all threads in Gavin's intricate design. Delilah was relocated to Aspen Grove Care Center. Her assigned nurse, a quiet plant chosen by Gavin, gently encouraged her to explore the past. Minor alterations to her prescriptions brought clarity to her memories, which were discreetly captured during these sessions. Bryce's job searches kept falling apart at the last possible moment, each promising opportunity crumbling inexplicably. Meanwhile, Arya's growing dissatisfaction reignited old grievances between them, echoes of the battles that once dissolved their marriage. Valerie threw herself into a prestigious penthouse renovation, desperate to win over her elite client. She didn't realize she was under silent surveillance, her every move catalogued, her decisions cross-referenced with old conversations she'd had with Paxton, slowly forming a case against her. But Gavin saved his most precise manipulations for the younger generation. Colin, increasingly unsettled by the eerie resemblance between Gavin and the father he barely remembered, began to investigate. Gavin intentionally left behind a digital breadcrumb trail, guiding Colin to disturbing discoveries, each one more shocking, pulling him step by step toward a devastating revelation. Nolan, meanwhile, was descending. What started as harmless errands for one of Gavin's operatives had escalated into more dangerous tasks. Nolan believed he was working for a petty criminal, unaware he was gathering incriminating material on his own bloodline. Lana, ever the quiet one, had remained untouched until Gavin recognized her role as the family's emotional core. She was the one they shielded, the one whose suffering would reverberate through them all. Exactly 6 weeks after the funeral, Gavin invited Valerie to the penthouse, under the pretense of reviewing her design progress. She found him at his desk, papers spread before him. "Thanks for coming," he said, eyes fixed on the documents. "I've been reviewing your submissions. We need to talk." His voice was different. Gone was the warm, supportive tone. What remained was cool, exacting. Valerie stiffened slightly. "Talk? I thought you were pleased with the direction. The vision's fine. The honesty, however, is lacking." He finally looked up, and in his expression was a faint but unmistakable echo of Paxton's familiar mannerisms, just enough to unnerve her. "You've inflated expenses, padded estimates, and tried to maximize profit while cutting corners." "That's not true," she said quickly, but the blush rising to her cheeks betrayed her. "Isn't it?" he countered, sliding a folder across the desk. These are the actual supplier invoices. I had them verified. You marked everything up 2 or 3-fold. The evidence was irrefutable. Under financial strain, Valerie had reverted to old habits she'd hoped to bury. Mr. Reed, industry standards allow for certain markups. Stop, he interrupted, voice sharp. I'm not here for polished justifications. I care about the truth, something I suspect you've long abandoned. Her face changed, less indignant now, more guarded. What are you implying? Gavin leaned in, voice low. I know about the arrangement, Valerie. The color drained from her face. What arrangement? The one you had with Randall Hart, and then with Dorian after Randall died. The one where you married a man you didn't love and raised children that weren't his. She recoiled as though slapped. How could you possibly? I know everything, he said, echoing Paxton's final words from a decade ago. About Randall, Dorian, and how you, Delilah, and the rest of them used Paxton like an open checkbook while playing at being one big happy family. Valerie stood abruptly, clutching her purse. I don't have to take this. Hire someone else. Sit, Gavin said, his voice now bearing the cold authority once associated with Paxton himself. To his satisfaction, she obeyed instinctively, sinking back into the chair. This ends when I say it does. He tapped a key on his laptop. A voice filled the room, Delilah's, soft and uncertain, recorded during one of her enhanced recollections at Aspen Grove. Paxton never knew. That was Randall's rule. He earned the money. We all benefited. Valerie belonged to Randall from the start, but she played her role well. Valerie froze, her hands trembling as her mother-in-law's voice spelled out the betrayal that had spanned 10 years. Where did you get that? She whispered. I've got it all, Valerie, Gavin said, his tone like a blade. Recordings, files, DNA analyses, enough to tear the curtain off your entire family's illusion. Her jaw tightened. What are you after? Money? I don't have any. I'm not here for your money, he interrupted flatly. I want your help. She stared him down. Help with what exactly? His smile was cold and deliberate. With delivering justice. Or, if you prefer a gentler term, reparation, he added. Your family stripped a man of everything, his love, his children, his life. And now, you're going to help me reclaim what was stolen. Confusion flickered in her eyes before realization began to settle in. Why do you care so much about Paxton Hart? She asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Who are you? Gavin didn't respond. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and slid a document across the desk toward her. A contract. You're going to sign this. Her eyes dropped to the page. This hands my design firm over to you. You'll remain the face of it, Gavin replied, but every cent of profit will be rerouted into accounts under my control. Her voice sharpened. This is blackmail. No, Valerie, he said quietly. This is the beginning of your unraveling. Think of it as lesson 1 in understanding loss. He leaned forward just slightly. Decline, and by tomorrow, every one of your relatives will receive unedited copies of Delilah's confession, plus a full dossier of Nolan's most recent criminal activity backed by timestamps and evidence from officers who owe me favors. With a shaking hand, Valerie signed, fury burning in her eyes. You won't get away with this. Gavin met her glare without flinching. I already have. Just like you all thought you got away with what you did to Paxton Hart. As she stormed out, rattled to the core, Gavin picked up his phone. Lawrence, he said coolly. It's time. Activate Colin. That evening, Colin Hart received a secure, encrypted email. Inside were edited clips from hidden surveillance, carefully selected footage from the final days of Paxton's life. They showed Randall, Dorian, and Valerie in moments that could destroy them. Alongside them, chilling audio fragments of Delilah's confession. The message attached was short. The man you're looking for was never lost. He was erased. Keep digging. Elsewhere, Bryce returned home to chaos. His laptop had been breached, its browser history now riddled with searches for divorce attorneys and custody battles. When his wife Aria confronted him, already suspicious, the confrontation exploded, ending with her throwing him out. Another domino toppled by Gavin's hand. By morning, Nolan was behind bars. An anonymous tip had exposed his deepening role in criminal operations Gavin had subtly encouraged. With no financial backing for legal defense, the charges landed like a final blow, draining what little remained of the family's strength. Only Lana remained untouched, for the moment. She withdrew into her artwork, channeling grief and confusion into raw, symbolic pieces. What she didn't realize was that Gavin had been quietly observing her. Her digital trail told him everything. Her art was soaked in loss, riddled with questions, proof that, somewhere deep down, she already sensed the truth. 3 days after Valerie surrendered her firm, Gavin arranged a quiet meeting with Colin at a modest cafe near campus. Colin showed up looking drained and restless, eyes hollow with suspicion. He sat without a word. "Who are you?" he demanded. "And what do you know about my father?" Gavin's reply was cool. "Which one? Paxton Hart, the man who raised you? Or Dorian, the man who shares your blood?" Colin went still. His skin paled. "What the hell are you talking about?" Gavin offered no verbal answer. He simply handed him a folder. Inside were detailed DNA test results. Colin's saliva, discreetly collected during a staged interview, compared to medical records from both Paxton and Dorian. Gavin spoke quietly. "Your life, Colin, was built on a lie. Your mother married Paxton, all while having an affair with his father, Randall. Even after Randall died, she kept seeing Dorian. You're Dorian's biological son, but Paxton never knew. He believed you were his." Colin's voice broke into a whisper. "That can't be true." But Gavin saw it, recognition blooming beneath denial. He saw the pieces click into place, the faint family resemblance he could never explain, the cold silences, the lingering unease he'd always pushed aside. "Everyone knew except Paxton," Gavin continued. "Your grandmother, your aunt, even your uncle. They called it the arrangement. Paxton gave you his name. They handled the rest." Colin's voice shook. "How do you know all this? Who the hell are you?" Gavin leaned in then, and for the first time, let a flicker of Paxton's spirit pass through him. "Someone who believes Paxton Hart deserves truth and justice." He didn't look away. "The question is, do you believe it?" Colin stared down at the folder, then back up, anger creeping into his voice. "If what you've shown me is real, then they didn't just betray him. They betrayed me too." His eyes darkened. "What kind of justice are you after?" Gavin didn't hesitate. "The complete dismantling of everything they built on lies. And I've already begun. Your grandmother now voices her secrets into a recorder every day. I've assumed full control of your mother's company. Your uncle Bryce has been thrown out of his estate, and your brother is facing serious felony charges. You're the thread unraveling everything they built." The words weren't laced with blame, just cold, factual resignation. Their downfall began the moment they decided to exploit Paxton Hart, using him like a disposable piece on their chessboard and betraying him in the most intimate, unforgivable ways. Gavin searched Colin's face for any flicker of alignment. "You have a decision to make. Stand with me and finish what they started, or be buried along with them." "And why would I ever help you?" "Because you've spent years chasing the truth about Paxton. Because you were the only one who actually gave a damn about what happened to him. And because, blood ties or not, you're the only one who carries his sense of right and wrong." Colin didn't respond. The war inside him was written clearly across his features. "If I agree," he said at last, voice low, "what happens to Lana and Nolan? They're not who I'm after." "Really?" Colin challenged. "Nolan's already slipping into their ways, pulling strings, rewriting outcomes, and Lana—" Gavin paused, his expression darkening. "Let's just say her innocence depends on who's telling the story. But their fates aren't sealed. Help me, and I'm willing to reconsider where they land." "Before I commit to anything," Colin said, squaring his shoulders, "I need the full truth. No more evasions." Gavin studied him for a long moment, smart, grounded, unshaken by bloodline. In Colin, he recognized something he thought had died with Paxton. "All right," Gavin finally said, "but not here." He scribbled an address on a crumpled napkin and slid it across the table. "Come tonight, 8 sharp, alone. Then you'll get everything you've been looking for." As Colin left, shaken but determined, Lawrence, who had been seated nearby, stood and approached. "You're really going through with this?" he asked. "If you reveal everything, the whole plan could fall apart." Gavin's eyes stayed locked on the door Colin had just exited. "Or," he said softly, "it could finally bring the ending we've been waiting for. One way or another, he deserves the truth. The full truth about what his family destroyed, and who returned to settle the score." The address led Colin to a plain, windowless warehouse tucked on the fringes of Denver. Inside, the cavernous space had been converted into a detailed, almost sacred archive of Paxton Hart's life, and Gavin Reed's decade-long pursuit of vengeance. Every wall was covered. Photos, transcripts, legal records, intercepted messages, surveillance reels. A museum dedicated to betrayal, loss, and retribution. At precisely 8 o'clock, Colin stepped inside. His movements were cautious, every muscle tense. Gavin, watching through hidden cameras, waited for the moment the weight of the evidence began to sink in. "What is all this?" Colin's voice echoed, low and awed. From the shadows, a man emerged. Not the polished businessman Gavin had pretended to be, but someone stripped of pretense. The makeup was gone. His hairstyle, his clothing, they mirrored the man Colin once looked up to. And when he spoke, it was not Gavin's practiced voice, but Paxton's, the cadence, the tone, unmistakable. "This," he said, "is the truth you've been chasing." Recognition didn't strike Colin like lightning. It came gradually, dawning slowly across his face, a war between logic and what his eyes were showing him. "No," he said, almost breathless. "It's not possible." Gavin stepped closer. 10 years ago, Paxton Hart uncovered the truth that his entire life had been a performance. His wife, his parents, his siblings, all complicit in deceiving him. Even the children he thought were his weren't. "You're not him," Colin murmured, shaking his head. "My father. He disappeared. He's dead." "Paxton Hart did die," Gavin replied. "The night he uncovered the whole betrayal, that version of him couldn't survive. So I buried him, and in his place I became someone new, Gavin Reed, the man who would deliver the justice Paxton never could." Colin staggered back, reaching out to steady himself against a glass case. "All this time, you were alive? Watching? Planning?" He gestured toward the web of evidence surrounding them. "Not just planning," Gavin corrected, "transforming, becoming the person Paxton never had the strength to be, a man capable of judgment, swift and final." He pressed a button on a remote, activating a screen nearby. A grainy video flickered to life. Randall Hart, frail and dying, confessing everything with a trembling voice. "It started with that confession," Gavin explained. "Then we found a hidden group chat on Randall's phone. Everything they said when they thought Paxton was gone. And finally, the DNA tests. Not one of the children he raised shared his blood." Why didn't you just confront them? Colin asked, voice sharp. Why disappear for a decade? Because confronting them would have achieved nothing, Gavin said, his tone like ice. They'd have spun it, lied, played the victims, and Paxton, he would have let them. He always did. That was his weakness. He stepped closer, eyes fierce. But I became someone different, someone they couldn't charm or deceive, someone capable of tearing down everything they built, one lie at a time. Colin looked at him, this phantom, this executioner in his father's face. So what happens now? Now you choose, Gavin said. Will you stand with the people who've lied to you since birth, or with the man who raised you knowing full well you weren't his? You knew? Colin asked quietly. Even before the tests, Gavin admitted. Paxton always suspected. You carry Dorian's features, his anger, his eyes. But Paxton chose you, loved you, gave you everything your real father never would. That was the only honest choice he ever made. The realization struck Colin with the force of a lightning bolt, emotion crashing through his expression as his eyes shimmered with tears. I've always felt like I didn't belong, he murmured, voice trembling. Like there was a wall between me and all of them, Mom, Uncle Dorian, the rest. I never understood why. Gavin's tone was quiet, almost reverent, because even without shared blood, you and Paxton had something rare. An unshakable sense of justice, a compass that always pointed true. That's a gift no one else in that family ever had. He moved closer, laying a steady hand on Colin's shoulder, firm but reassuring. And that's why I'm offering you a path. A path? Colin echoed, barely above a whisper. Yes. Walk with me. Help me complete what was set in motion long ago. Bring every hidden truth into daylight. Take back what was stolen. Hold them accountable. Or, Gavin's voice dropped, turn back. Return to those who've built your life on lies, and go down with them. Colin didn't answer. The silence thickened as he tried to process the weight of it all. Then, quietly, Lana, Nolan, they're still my brother and sister, even if it's not by blood. They've been maneuvered like pawns, Gavin said. Where they end up depends entirely on the choices they make now. And Mom, Grandma, everyone else? They made their beds long ago, Gavin said, unflinching. Again and again, their fates are sealed. The only thing still unwritten is what you and your siblings will do. Will you continue the legacy of deceit or break free from it? Colin drew himself up slowly, wiping his face with the back of his hand. I want everything. No more fragments, no more riddles. I need the full story before I decide. And so Gavin gave it to him. Over the next 3 hours, he laid bare the entire history. Paxton's marriage to Valerie, Randall's manipulative agreements, a decade marked by betrayal and silence, Gavin's transformation, and the careful architecture of his revenge. By the time his voice finally faded, the early light of morning spilled into the warehouse, casting long beams across the relics of 2 lives. One shattered, one reconstructed. Tomorrow marks the final move, Gavin said softly. Everyone will be at Aspen Grove for Delilah's birthday. Their last illusion of being a family. I'll attend, he continued, as Gavin Rourke, a prospective benefactor for Delilah's ongoing care. At exactly 2 p.m., every piece of evidence will be delivered, digital records to their devices, and physical files hand-delivered by my team. They won't be able to deny a thing. Total exposure. Colin's eyes narrowed. And after that? The foundation crumbles, Gavin said. Everything Paxton tried and failed to keep buried will be legally reclaimed. The frameworks I've built over years will activate. Delilah's medical treatment will be at my discretion. Valerie's firm, which I now control, will be dissolved. The house, secured through a web of shell corporations, will be repossessed. Their reputations, careers, the lives they built through manipulation, it will all unravel. You've considered every possibility, Colin said, dazed. It consumed me for 10 years, Gavin admitted, his gaze unwavering. All that remains now is your answer. Colin exhaled deeply. I stand with the truth. With you, Fath... He stopped, uncertain. Gavin met his eyes steadily. Paxton was your father in the ways that matter, but he's gone. What remains is me. Colin nodded. Then I'm with you. The following day, the celebration meant to honor Delilah Hart's 70th birthday began under a thick, unseen shadow. The gathering at Aspen Grove Care Center was strained, the air heavy with unresolved conflict, financial woes, Nolan's legal troubles, and festering family resentments. Valerie arrived first, her smile tight and rehearsed, masking the anxiety simmering beneath her polished surface. Since her last encounter with Gavin, she had tried every tactic to stop him, but found no leverage. Arya and Bryce arrived separately, their estrangement still painfully fresh. Lana walked in beside Arya, quiet and observant, clutching her sketchbook as if it could protect her. Nolan entered last, visibly worn from a courtroom appearance, defiant energy hanging around him like armor. Only Colin was missing. He had sent a message claiming a delay, but he was still with Gavin, finalizing the plan. At precisely 1:30 p.m., Gavin Rourke stepped into the care center. Impeccably dressed and carrying a tasteful bouquet for Delilah, he radiated calm authority. The reactions were immediate. Valerie's posture stiffened. Arya and Bryce exchanged wary looks. Nolan barely acknowledged him, his expression hardening. Lana studied him silently. "This is a private family event, Mr. Rourke," Valerie said coldly, straining for control. "Naturally," Gavin replied, voice smooth as silk. "I simply came to pay my respects. The staff mentioned Mrs. Hart rarely receives visitors these days. I found that disheartening, considering how pivotal she once was to such a remarkable family." His words hit like a veiled dagger. Valerie paled. Delilah, however, seemed uplifted by the attention. Her clarity today wasn't coincidence. Gavin had quietly ensured her medication schedule was adjusted to sharpen her mind for this moment. For half an hour, he mingled with careful grace, engaging in conversation laced with subtext. Only Valerie grasped the full weight of what he was really saying. As the minute hand crept toward 2 p.m., Gavin glanced at his watch, a nearly imperceptible signal to Lawrence, watching from a distance. Right as the clock struck, every phone in the room vibrated with incoming alerts. Valerie seemed to wilt where she stood, her posture caving in as the weight of realization slammed into her. Arya burst into sobs, while Bryce stood paralyzed, mouth ajar in silent shock. Only two faces in the room reacted with unsettling clarity. Lana and Nolan, children at the time Paxton vanished. Nolan's eyes burned with restrained rage and suspicion. Lana, by contrast, was disturbingly calm, as if she'd always known this day would come. "This can't be happening," Arya gasped through her tears. "Paxton, he disappeared. He's dead." "On paper, yes," Gavin said, his voice cool and steady. "Paxton Hart ceased to exist, but I didn't." Just then, personnel from the care center stepped in, each one discreetly on Gavin's payroll, distributing sealed envelopes to everyone present. "What is this?" Arya asked, tearing hers open as others reached for their phones. Inside, both physically and digitally, lay comprehensive dossiers. The documents detailed, with clinical precision, each person's role in the systematic betrayal of Paxton Hart. There were photos, wiretaps, sworn testimony, even genetic evidence. It was irrefutable. The room turned to stone, the silence suffocating, as each person realized the full scope of their unveiled deceptions and those of everyone else. Delilah, her hands trembling, stared at the damning contents. Her voice barely carried. "What does this even mean?" Gavin's reply was razor-sharp in its simplicity. "Justice. Overdue, but here all the same." Valerie's voice cracked into a whisper. "Who are you?" But even as she asked, horror overtook her expression. The answer was already dawning. At that precise beat, Colin stepped into the room and moved to stand beside Gavin, his silence speaking louder than words. "He's the man you all betrayed," Colin said evenly. "The man whose life you tore apart." A slow, chilling smile spread across Gavin's face as he shed the final remnants of the disguise he'd worn for a decade. "Paxton Hart died the day he uncovered the truth about you all," he said, his voice no longer masked. "What you're looking at now is the result of your betrayal." The shock on their faces matched exactly what Gavin had envisioned in his darkest moments over the years. Delilah's hands were shaking so violently, her documents spilled and scattered across the floor. Gavin gestured toward the damning evidence clutched in each hand. "Unlike Paxton, I don't forgive. I don't forget. And I don't spare those who never deserved grace." "What do you want from us?" Bryce rasped, his voice raw. "Money? We don't have anything left." Gavin's expression didn't change. "You're absolutely right," he said dryly. "You don't." "Because I already took it all," he continued. "That house you're living in, mine, your careers, dismantled by design. Your reputations, gone, erased with the truth I've patiently collected. And as for whatever future you imagined, you'll find I've already cut that path short. Deliberately, efficiently." He turned to Valerie. "Your design firm, I bought it last month, and by tomorrow it'll be liquidated, along with any hope of financial recovery." Then to Delilah. "Your care here? It survives on my funding. And let me be clear, I didn't buy this facility for your comfort. I bought it for this moment." To Arya and Bryce, he added with detached finality, "Every major employer in Denver has received a detailed account of your actions. Consider yourselves professionally exiled." Finally, he looked at Nolan. "Your situation is far from over. The things you've been part of, every last one, is backed by evidence gathered by experts I personally hired." "You can't do this!" Valerie screamed, her voice cracking under the strain. "We have rights!" Gavin gave a cold, bitter laugh. "Rights? Did Paxton have the right to know that his wife was sleeping with his own father, or that the children he adored weren't his? Did he have a right to a life not built on betrayal and lies?" His voice rose, sharpened by fury honed over years of silence. "You forfeited your rights the moment you destroyed a good man for your own selfish gain." Colin stepped forward then, his voice filled with quiet intensity. "I've seen it all. Every deception, every twisted manipulation. I know the truth now. How you used him, how you built an entire life on lies, how you made me part of something monstrous without ever thinking twice about the damage." "Colin, please," Valerie begged, her voice hollow. "He's turning you against us. We're your family." Colin didn't hesitate. "You're the ones who lied to me for as long as I've been alive. He nodded to Gavin, "chose to be my father, even when he knew I wasn't his by blood. That makes him more of a parent than you ever were." Then Lana spoke, her voice soft but steady, breaking her silence for the first time. "I always felt something was wrong," she said. "When I was little, I used to dream about a man watching from far away. I didn't know who he was, but I kept painting him over and over again." She looked straight at Gavin. "It was you, wasn't it? All this time?" Gavin gave a faint nod, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "In a way," he said. "Yes." "What happens next?" Lana asked, her voice calm despite the devastation left in the wake of recent events. Gavin's reply was steady, unwavering. "Now begins the reckoning. The consequences of decisions made long ago are finally coming due. Your wealth, your status, your legal standing, none of it will remain untouched. The only thing left to decide is how you respond, and whether there's anything left to rescue from the fallout." He turned on his heel and Colin wordlessly followed. At the doorway, Gavin looked back at the fractured remnants of the family behind him. Paxton Hart disappeared because the world gave him no choice, he said. He lived inside a lie designed to reward everyone but him. He trusted the wrong people. He loved those who couldn't return it. He deserved better. A moment passed. When Gavin spoke again, his tone had hardened. That man is gone. What's left is who you see now. I didn't just survive what you did, I became something else entirely. Remember that, when everything starts falling apart. As the door closed, Colin turned toward him. So, it's done? The unveiling is done, Gavin replied. But the consequences will continue. They'll unravel piece by piece, all according to the framework I set in motion. As for justice, that journey's only begun. For years, they had watched Paxton wither beneath the weight of secrets, never suspecting what lay beneath. Now, the dynamic had shifted. In the years ahead, they would endure their downfall fully aware, unable to escape the truth, knowing Gavin would be watching, powerless to reverse what had begun. Colin hesitated. And what about us? You and me? Lillian, Nolan? Gavin didn't answer immediately. The name Paxton still carried traces of warmth for the younger ones, those caught in the crosshairs of their parents' betrayal. But Gavin Rourke, forged in suffering and deceit, had buried that warmth deep beneath layers of resolve. You made the hard choice, he said finally. You stood for truth, even when it cost you. That pain is real, but so is the opportunity it brings. He placed a firm hand on Colin's shoulder. Lana understands more than she lets on. If she can find the courage you've shown, she might still forge a future of her own. He paused before continuing. Nolan, he still moves in his mother's shadow. His fate will be shaped by the decisions he hasn't yet made. As they left Aspen Grove behind, Gavin glanced into the rearview mirror. In the distance, his operatives were distributing sealed documents to gathered reporters. Each envelope held the full, unfiltered truth. Anonymous tips had drawn the press to the facility. By night's end, the entire Hart facade would be shattered, exposed for all to see. It had been a decade since Paxton Hart vanished, leaving behind only a single message. I know everything. Goodbye. Now, at last, justice had found its mark. The family who once betrayed him would carry the weight of a future shaped with the same ruthless precision they once used to destroy him. And Gavin Rourke, the man who rose from the ruin of Paxton Hart, would observe it all from afar, detached, unwavering, and merciless. Some debts he had come to realize could only be paid in full. Our story comes to an end here. Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for taking the time to watch. If you enjoyed this story, please check out other videos on this channel. See you soon, my dear friend.